Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to Teddy's Directors Exchange here in Manifesto at the 74th Berlinale. Please give a warm welcome to our guests that I'll be introducing to you in a second, but a round of applause for these wonderful people. It's an immense honor to have with me Lola, Arias, the directress of Reas, that premiered in Forum just a few days ago, and then Schoenbrun. Their film is about to premiere tomorrow in the Panorama section, as well as LaBruce, whose film The Visitor has been playing in Panorama since a few days, and we're super happy to have you. Thanks for taking the time for this. So. The idea of that directors exchange is to bring together films that might be different yet similar in structures. It's about exploring the queer films in the different sections, bringing them together into conversation, and that's what we're basically planning to do. And all the three films have fiercely unstoppable, fabulous characters, as well as really transgressive, genre-defining forms, playing around with the suspension of reality, as well as with creating new realities, but we'll hear more about that in a second. I would maybe like to quickly introduce the three of you, and then we can start delving into the conversation on the films. So, Lola Arias, to my right, is from Argentina, a writer, theater and film director, multifaceted artist, bringing people together from different backgrounds and communities, amongst other former incarcerated people, sex workers, young refugees, war veterans, amongst others, groups that she was artistically working with for different and several projects. Her first feature film, Theatre of War, also premiered here in Berlinale in 2018 in the Forum section. And she's been in between and now also once again doing a lot of theater that is maybe, I don't know, we may call it something like documentary theater, or working with always bits of realities or actual lived realities and bringing them on stage and into performance. And then next to Lola we have Jane Schoenbrun, who's a non-binary filmmaker and writer dedicated to making and supporting personal and queer cinemas. And their work includes I Saw the TV Glow, which has now is premiering tomorrow here in Berlinale, but has earlier this year premiered in Sundance and had really a beautiful resonance so far. So it's a real pleasure talking about it. We'll hear something about the film. We hope not to spoil it too much, but let's see about that. And the first novel is almost finished. That's maybe also when we talk about different forms, something we could go into. And their New Year's resolution is to get more comfortable with silence. Maybe we'll be silent after this. And then we have Bruce LaBruce. Many of you might know Bruce as a filmmaker, as a photographer, as a writer and an artist based in Toronto, but working internationally, having done a number of short films, exhibitions, a photo book, a lot of porn, a lot of feature films, but also a lot of theater, so that's another parallel here in the situation. And premiered now 2 days ago, as said, The Visitor in Panorama, a super interesting piece that brings Theorema in a completely new setting and plays and pushes boundaries very, very, very well. So I would maybe like to start hearing from you in a quick self-description, how you would introduce your very projects or films that are now playing in the sections for people who might not have seen them yet, for us to be able to talk about them. Lola, maybe you want to start with Reas, which is a formally super interesting piece when we think about you bringing a group of people, performers together, working on a documentary level when it comes to working with their realities, but staging them in a very particular architecture, creating a very specific genre, which is then again musical. With maybe tell us a little bit about how this project came about and how you would describe it to someone who has not seen it yet.
Okay, I do my best. I have problems hearing inside this place, but I will try to follow everything. Yeah, I think Reas is a film that started with a workshop I did in the prison of Ezeiza. And when I was doing this workshop for cinema and theater in the prison, I started to develop the idea of working in a film. This was 5 years ago, the first time I entered Ezeiza. And the characters that play in the film are people I met in these workshops and over years of investigating and researching on the experiences of people who had been in jail. So all the protagonists of the film, even though sometimes they play the guards or they play the doctors or lawyers, they are all people who had the experience of imprisonment. The film has this musical genre, which was a way we found not to reproduce the stigmatization that people actually experience in jail and after jail, to make something beautiful, to make them shine in a strange way, to create a level of fantasy and imagination within this context of violence and oppression. And actually it's also coming from them because their relationship with music was very strong. There is a trans man in the film called Nacho who had a band together with Steffi, and they had this band, and this band was the way they were resisting somehow inside. So we actually thought it was a nice way to continue the artistic work they already were doing and push it a bit further.
Yeah, thank you very much. So it's basically co-creative approaches to translating real lived experience into this musical setting. And as you said, you work with bits and pieces of their lived reality and kind of reenact them, but maybe also alter them every now and then. But let's go into the altering part a bit later and hear from Jane. I saw the TV Glow. What are people about to expect from tomorrow on?
I suppose I'll talk about how the film came about. It's my second feature film. I had been working on my first feature film for a number of years, and my first film, very small film, about. I was really fascinated with like experiences that I had had as a young person on the internet. And these sort of very personal relationships that existed outside of the body, and this sense of a feeling that I had when I was a teenager, which was a feeling of not really belonging in my body. And when I started working on that film, I had not come out as trans, and by the end of the creative process with that film, and really through working on that film, I think I started to find language to describe a queer experience, and then started transitioning. I saw the TV Glow, my second film, which is a bigger film, is reflecting, I think, through a lot of the same language that I developed in my first film. It's about these two teenagers stuck in the suburbs who are obsessed with this kids' TV show, but their obsession with this TV show is sort of in sort of like a genre metaphor, intertwined with their queerness and the ways they are or aren't embracing their queerness. But it was a film that was written and conceived like during the very early stages of gender transition. So during a time when I hadn't yet experienced a lot of the joy of transition, and it was more the fallout and trauma of early transition. And so the film, I think, is reflecting on, it's not so much a film about transitioning, it's a film about seeing yourself for the first time. And so in a way, my filmography to date is sort of me reflecting in hindsight on various points of my transition, is how I would describe it.
But could I have a mic? Yeah, sorry. But you do that in an aesthetically really joyous way, because you explore all kinds of like TV aesthetics, maybe things you relate to yourself a lot, and then there's a lot of reality within the reality movements that we will maybe talk about a bit later on. and especially also this aspect of spectatorship, like looking at yourself through, is something that is really striking to me. So thanks, and let's hear more about it in a second. Bruce, what is The Visitor?
So I'm here with my film The Visitor, which is a reimagining of Pasolini's film Teorema, which came out in 1968. It's obviously Pasolini and Fassbinder are two of my queer heroes, cinematic heroes, and so I've always been drawn to Teorema in particular, and it's already a very queer film. It's about a visitor who comes to visit a bourgeois Milanese family, and he ends up having sex with every member of the family, including the maid, and which causes them to experience some kind of radical transformation or liberation or destruction. And I made it in London. It started out more as an art project, so it was at a arts organization called Apolitical, which is known for supporting outsider artists whose work is too difficult or expensive or complicated for the orthodox art world. They support artists like Andre Saranos and Andrei Molodkin, the Russian artist that you may have read about in the New Yorker recently, who's put a bunch of really expensive artwork in a furnace that he's built, and he's going to burn it if Julian Assange dies in prison. $54 million worth of art, including a Picasso and Warhol. And anyway, I'm just to say that's the kind of artists that they work with. And indeed, Andrei Molodkin has a compound in the south of France called the Foundry, and we shot part of the film down there. So I'm using his epic sculpture words. But the whole thing started out as an art project, and it was really interesting because I didn't really necessarily expect it to become a film that would be seen more theatrically, or even I was expecting to show it more in art context, art galleries, but it kind of took on a life of its own. It became more ambitious than I expected. In my version, The Visitor, because I was shooting it in London, I wanted to have a contemporary political context, and also to present it as an expression of new queer aesthetics and new queer sexual politics that are relevant today. So I have my visitor is a black refugee who washes up in a suitcase on the banks of the Thames, and he goes and finds a bourgeois family, and he fucks them all, but he really fucks them all, like not like in Pasolini's, where it's like it's kind of hinted at or suggested. In my movie, it's a full-on porn movie, basically. So it was very challenging, and I'm really happy to be here at the Berlinale with him.
Yeah, thanks for being here. You're just saying about the collaboration with your protagonists, who are basically performers, and I think that's also something I would like to talk about in the round, but maybe come back to Lola for a start, because we were already saying your protagonists are documentary subjects, and they're also collaborators and co-creators of the story. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the co-creation process? I think you were already hinting to that there were lived moments of reality, like the moment of the band coming together, but also maybe the co-writing of the songs and as well the choreographies. How did that come about? And did the group know each other before because they did theater together, or was it something that happened only within the shooting of the film?
Yeah, I mean, the process of working was that actually for over 5 years, I was doing different workshops inside of the prison and outside of the prison, and that's how the group got consolidated over the years. And some people got lost in the middle of the way, and some people got together more and more. These two people that I talked about before, they had this band, and actually they were already interested in music, and we expanded this band with other people who didn't know them before. So, and they started to train in music and to train in choreography. The writing of the song was a very collaborative process. So actually the idea, for example, to make a song about the matrons, like the guards, was coming from them, because I thought, I mean, we want to say what we wanted to say every day when we were put in a line to be counted. And we would have liked to say something, but we couldn't. So we wrote this song talking about the things that they actually wanted to express when they were in confinement, and they couldn't. So it was a very playful also process, and actually a very inspiring also, because also in terms of the choreographies and the genres, there is a trans woman who is a voguing dancer, and she actually made voguing workshops for all of us. So we actually managed to get into the voguing scene and to learn how much empowerment was coming from the scene. So it was a learning process for everyone who was part of this. So I'm actually, super happy that at the end there is this film existing.
But it's also a fusion or remix of different musical or also musical styles and dance styles, and they were coming from the protagonists. So you were pointing to that very song, To the Guards, which is also a moment of speaking back to a really violent reality that becomes suddenly very joyful and funny and humorous. And also you were referencing there was a cumbia style or a cumbia song, for example, in there. So there's also cultural references that come together. Maybe you want to elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, I think the film has this kind of potpourri of genres, like from cumbia to rock and roll to pop songs to, and these genres come from them. And I think we tried to create songs that they could actually feel represented by, that they feel like that they could express themselves with them. So I think that's how we thought about it, even if at the end it's a bit crazy how you change from one to the other. But I think also musical in itself, it was such a provocative thing to make a musical with people who had been in jail, and also to give them the chance to show themselves as virtuous dancers and singers. And even if there is a very precarious or lo-fi kind of musical, it's very authentic in them, and very real.
Yeah, and it gives, I guess it gives the possibility to play and to throw around just all kinds of funny stuff, weird stuff. Not, as you say, maybe in the end it's a bit wild, but it's maybe exactly that wildness that pushes a reality to the borders, and there's also a freeing moment in that, maybe. Before I come back to you, Jane, Bruce, you were just pointing to the performers you were working with, and I think you do have approaches of working with non-actors, with professional actors, with porn performers, but this particular constellation was a collaborative moment in there, and how was it important to you to work with performance artists and not with actors, and also putting them into sex scenes, explicit scenes? Have they been doing porn before? Was that something you explored together, and how did you bring all that into one space?
Yeah, there's some parallels between Lola's film and mine, I think, because it's like working with non-professional actors in a kind of almost workshop environment kind of space. I shot most of the sex scenes all of them actually, at Apolitical in the actual gallery exhibition space, which is in the basement of their, it's a former bacon factory. So it's not a huge space, but I actually cast it from Toronto and by Zoom. So I didn't meet any of the performers until the first day on set, which was really interesting. But I've done that before. I mean, I quite often don't have any rehearsal time or time to be with the actors beforehand. It was a matter of trust. Like I trusted the people who were casting it to provide me with people that would be open to the experience and had certain kinds of sexual experiences in performing sex, if not porn, then something like burlesque or two of the performers do body suspensions with hooks, and they've done it many times. They're professionals. So we actually did that as part of the process of making the film. They get suspended, and we had to bring in, of course, a professional who knows how to do the suspensions. And it was fascinating. It was a very process-oriented movie, and we filmed like hours and hours of the preparation and putting the hooks through their bodies and lifting them up. And then in the film, it's like 5 seconds. It's like, it's maybe two scenes, one maybe less than 30 seconds and the other one about the same. So, we had to be very disciplined in the editing to not like try to throw in all the additional material we had. But the main performer who plays the visitor who has sex with all the members of the family is Bishop Black, who's a well-known queer actor, performance artist who lives in Berlin. I'd worked with him on a porn film before, and he's in the film, his character calls himself a pansexual revolutionary, and that's pretty much what he is. He's he has sexual chemistry, attraction to pretty much everyone. His character is very polymorphously perverse, and so we had an amazing intimacy coordinator as well, Lydia Ravisia, who actually she was from the same city that Pasolini was assassinated in, Ostia. So she knew like so much about Pasolini, and she really taught me more about Pasolini. But just as someone on set who gained that, she had everyone's back. She was like making sure that everything was obviously consensual, but also that everyone knew each other's boundaries, sexual boundaries. That the set was relaxed and conducive to being able to stage these sex scenes. We had like a green room kind of before each sex scene. She would sit with the performers, and they'd discuss any concerns they had or how they were feeling that day, a particular day, if there was anything everyone should know about. I mean, so the general atmosphere was just incredibly creative and kind of an atmosphere of trust, and but it was also a very, very intense shoot because we shot 7 full days in a row, 14, 16-hour days, and later we went to the south of France and shot some more material for it. But yeah, I work with non-performers, non-actors, non-professional actors a lot. I also make bigger budgeted films where I do it more conventionally, cast through casting agents and work with professional actors. But I'm used to working with non-actors, and for me, it's really satisfying because, for example, in my movie The Visitor, there's very little dialogue, which is the same with Pasolini's original. But after about 3/4 of the way through the movie, it's almost no dialogue, and they've had all these sex scenes, and there's a scene where they sit down at dinner, and they then each have really long monologues, each member of the family, and the visitor, and it's kind of like they're non-professional actors, and I felt so like I was emotional because they had learned their monologues so thoroughly and had really kind of put the work into it, and it was a kind of cathartic moment for them all to express verbally what they had been doing physically for all those days. We ended up shooting that scene on the last day of shooting, so it was a very, you can feel the emotion in the way they perform.
Yeah, I think it's extremely interesting because I feel this way of work also allows to translate, translate, so to say, some of the qualities of performance and also the density of time and space. If you're in a space for such a long time, if you're in the same constellation for such a long time, if rehearsal becomes the product, and it's very process oriented, and that really also relates to the sensation that comes across, and yet you have out a storyline or a form that kind of holds it together and brings it to another level, and that's really something that happens on very, very different levels in both of your films, and I appreciate that a lot. So I think something I would like to go into a bit later is also the aspect of choreography, because there is this moment of a few lines or heavy monologues in just tiny glimpses, but there's a lot of narrative that is physical narrative, and there's a lot of communication also of plot that happens through interactions and physical interactions. But Jane, first I'd really love to hear from you. How did you cast your actors, like departing from a very personal story, but then also coming up with something that is inscribing certain realities and characters into something like a 90s TV canon. So there's also this kind of ambivalence between something very close and something really universal, or maybe even, formally, opening up a space that is relatable for identification a lot, or that has been crucial for identification for many of us.
I think I would again look at it in contrast with my first film, which was a very small film. I think we had like a crew of 7, and our lead actor, who really carries the film, is in every single scene essentially, was 17 and a first-time actor, and that film, so much of that film succeeding to me was about kind of capturing lightning in a bottle in the way that you can with non-actors, and the way that you can sort of pull from their own history and their own personality. Very different to work with professional trained actors, which is what I did on this one, and very different to work with a bigger crew, which I think was just as much of a change as non-actor to actor, in that it became much harder to capture these sort of improvisational or off-the-cuff moments, because you have this large machine sort of moving behind you. It all is pre-planned, and it's all sort of according to schedule, and I was actually quite afraid that would sort of render it kind of limp, or so much of like the magic of I think production, so much of the creativity of film production is about capturing something that feels really visceral and wild and present. I cast a lot of professionals, but I tried to do it in my own way. My 2 leads, Justice Smith and Bridget Lundy Payne. Bridge is somewhere in the audience. There they are. What up? Younger queer actors who have worked a lot in Hollywood, and I think we're both quite hungry for something a little more adventurous, and with Bridge especially, just like anytime I get to collaborate with another trans, non-binary actor, and sort of like pull threads of sort of like the personal in the performance, this is always very exciting for me. But I really just tried to like play, I wanted to cast something that if you added up it in your head, it would feel like the inside of my brain. Like, for instance, there's sort of like an angry father character in the movie, and I said to myself, like, who would I cast to play like my angry father? If I dreamt about an angry father, who would that be? And I was like, that would be Fred Durst from Limp Bizkit, the band, and so we got Fred Durst. And another example would be my film, because it is this 90s television pastiche, has a lot of monsters in it. And there was always this question of like, who is going to play the monsters? And I ended up casting essentially one person to play all of the monsters in the film, who was a dancer, a queer dancer named Emma Portner, whose work I quite liked. And I was basically just like, why not have the monsters dance? And in these little ways, hopefully the film adds up to something that, even though it's sort of cast in a more traditional way, you're pulling these elements in that, when you see Fred Durst or when you see somebody whose body moves like Emma's body, you're not just seeing somebody like bringing their acting class to the screen, you're seeing something more visceral.
No, it's really beautiful because through those small shifts, there's a lot of glitching. And I feel it's really also something that when it comes to creating queer narrative, this moment of glitch and distortion and blur, we were already talking about it, is very, very strong. And I love how it also translates aesthetically. And I was wondering, because in the two films I had the feeling it was a lot about like physical presence and also also being in the moment. And I saw the TV Glow, I was thinking about projection and even dissociation a lot. So to dissociate or disappear or merge yourself into new digital spaces. Sorry, what was that?
Talk about glitching.
Maybe you want to tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think I'm a strange mix as an artist of like a bit of a people pleaser, and I think it's because I really did grow up with like pop culture, American pop culture. Like I grew up with these silly, like teens fight monsters TV shows, and I love them. They're a part of my youth. But then I also like just love mischief. And I think my own experience of like growing up in America and growing up trans and queer in America is one that's like kind of everything that's beautiful is also horrific, and so I think my films tend to be these like these like genre movies that if you go into them sort of like expecting a traditional American genre movie, you're going to come out of it like kind of angry at me. And if you go in expecting something that will hopefully like subvert those expectations in a way that feels like personal, and the subversion becomes like part of the entertainment almost, then hopefully the film will ask you questions that are resonant. And I think also like just in terms of glitch, like it's literalized in my film. Obviously, it's like a film about like analog media. We shot the film on 35 millimeter and then transferred a lot of that 35 millimeter to VHS tape, like old VHS tape, like expired VHS tape. And so a lot of the film is sort of like purposefully distorting. I think I kind of come from this like internet tradition that now has a name I just recently discovered. They call it like analog horror, but like kids on the internet sort of making intentionally grainy, fucked up, vague, kind of like horrific imagery. And I do think for me growing up, like this was a comfort. There's like a queer application to this art, which is that like there's something both like grotesque but magical and haunting about the thing, and you're sort of squinting through the static to see it. Just kind of playing on this tradition to tell the stories that I tell.
I mean, for me, it also really does something with time, because we were talking about the time the performer spent in the visitor, like 15, 16 hours a day, and then it's merged into the filmic narrative. But there it does something to time on a larger scale, because it also merges different like moments in time and the media expressions that are related to them. So the blur and the distortion is not only of what I see or perceive, but it's also my orientation of where I'm at or what maybe those projections are coming from.
My friend who was my assistant on the film talked a lot about the idea of trans girl time. I think trans girls especially have like a very complex relationship to time, because so many years are lost in like sort of the fog of repression and dysphoria. This sort of like half living, you once you do start living in a way where you're less repressed, you carry the weight of all of those years that you lost. You also carry the weight of just the mortality rate for trans girls is horrifying, and so I think a lot of certainly myself and a lot of like trans girls that I know sort of have this common experience of this kind of like very complex self-destructive relationship to time, where it feels like everything is very urgent. You've lost all of these years, you might not have as many years as you want, and so time just takes on a very uncanny and I think perhaps unhealthy atmosphere, and I tried to represent that in the way the narrative plays in the film. My film covers something like 40 years of linear time, but my view of it isn't quite as straightforward as like trying to represent it in a linear sense.
No, I hear you. Thanks for also elaborating on that. I think this aspect of queer time and queer timing is really strong there. Lola, your set is a very specific architecture, and spending time in that architecture that carries a lot of violence, a lot of history that used to be a prison architecture, and bringing those people who have the experience of incarceration back to such a space, kind of like re-inscribing them into the architecture, and also maybe being able to move in that architecture in a completely different way in relation to the experience. How much time did you spend there? And maybe you want to tell us about the particular place and how you build up also as a group a relationship to the place.
Yeah, the film is shot in a former prison in the middle of Buenos Aires. It's called Caseros, and it's closed since 2001. It used to be a male prison, and it's interesting because the prison always think in a very binary way. There is the male prison and there's the women prison, but actually prisons are a very queer space, and what you see in this film is that you are like the people who live in this prison, in the female prison, there is a trans man, there is trans woman, and there is cis women that actually create a community together and support each other, and this is something that is not very talked about. And actually the space that we took, I think the fact that it was a male prison and somehow it was inhabited by all these queer people, and the whole energy that was very heavy was actually transformed through these very playful songs that we played. So we used to say that we are taking out the ghosts to dance with us while we were shooting. Because actually the place in itself was very heavy and very dark. And I didn't want to do a film that was, reproducing this darkness, but more like that is bringing hope. So I think we kind of, managed.
You managed very well. How much time did you spend there?
The whole shooting was 4 weeks, but we did the first week of shoot, and then we were thinking about how we wanted to continue, and then we did 3 weeks later on. It was also very intense.
Yeah, I was wondering how you approached the aspect of agency, because I was thinking of this moment of freeze that is kind of lifted through the choreographies and through the music. Is it really like a workshop situation that then translated into scenes? Or was it similar to what Bruce was describing in the shooting process itself?
No, actually when I started the shooting, in difference to what Bruce was saying, that he didn't know the performers before, we had been working for like years, and the script was actually totally finished, and the songs and the choreographies were rehearsed. But nevertheless, there is always improvisation in this kind of work, and you never know what is going to happen actually in a shooting day. But actually, I think I like that in the film you see that that there is a script, because there is this scene, for example, when Nacho and Josely are flirting, and they start to somehow get lost in their lines, and at some point they get like they don't know what to say anymore, and they say, oh, we lost our lines, where are we? And they continue flirting nevertheless. So actually you see that in the backstage and in the fiction there was a lot of like love and fun between them, and that the things we were showing were not so far from what they were actually experiencing.
Yeah, and also it tells the relationality between the two of them, maybe as a secondary or tertiary storyline again. There's also another aspect that you maybe tackled upon a bit earlier when you were saying what it meant to have the song to the guards, like speaking to them. But it's also that the group embodies figures that are not themselves as prisoners or former prisoners, but they also step into the roles of other people, guards, doctors, etc. Maybe you want to tell us a bit about that translation, and also what it meant to go into the policing body, basically, that you were exposed to formerly, not you as a person, but the protagonist as a person.
Yeah, I think we were discussing a lot about how to represent the guards in the film, and I think for me it was interesting to also portray the different relationships they had with the guards. So in the film where they dress up as the guards, and one of the performers is saying that actually she had a good relationship with the guards, and like she felt like that they were respecting her and so on. And the other one says, but they beat us up, they destroyed us. So you see these two positions being confronted in a way that they can actually, embody these roles, but also have fun while embodying these people. And being able to show also their opinion or their experience with the whole system.
Yeah, thank you. Jane, Lola was just talking about hunting out the ghosts out of the building, and I think you were tackling upon the monsters a little earlier. And there is a lot of ghosts flying around in your film. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about your relationship to those specters.
Yeah, I think that the way that I approach any movie is, I think through, right, like like an oniric approach, like film as like a dream, or film as like a way to talk about, as a form, as a way to talk about memory. Realism, I just don't think I could do it. It would be too much work for something so boring, and so I think like when I approach a film, like tone comes before tone, and emotion and theme come before character and plot, which are also there, but they kind of come last. And I listen to a lot of music early in the creative process and really try to like zero in on, I want this film to feel like this song makes me feel, and so I think that like it's just natural that these works would be sort of haunted, and maybe it's because I'm haunted, or I'm drawn to art and to music that feels haunted in some way. In a literal way, the films, both so far, are sort of like haunted by these like vague monster figures. But it's a strange thing. It's I think I try to keep it a little closer to the margins of the film than genre filmmakers traditionally do. I'm not so interested in things like jump scares, I am interested in like mythology, and actually I'm quite a nerd about it. Like on my first film, I wrote like a fake Wikipedia for this online horror game that was at the center of this film. And in this film, I wrote like half of an episode guide for this TV show that doesn't actually exist, but plotted out like the whole world of this show. But I think I do it more so that it feels authentic in the movie. I do it so that even if you're only catching like these glimpses of this elaborate genre mythology on the sort of margins of the film, it feels like something that's actually worth investing in, and not like somebody doing a bad impression of it. And yeah, I think like a film where there is something lurking, in the margins, whether that be through like the glaze of a screen, or in like a very wide shot. This reflects something of how I feel about my childhood, or how I feel about my memory, and so the monsters are more sort of like embedded, and ghosts are sort of more like they're photographed like fine art or something. Like I would joke on set that like the idea was to take like a European art house sort of aesthetic, and then just put like a shitty silicon Canadian budget TV from the 90s monster like in wide, and just light it beautifully. Yeah, and I think it's like just pulling from different forms that have meant something to me over the years and trying to create something that feels like the movie that I wished existed when I was a kid.
Yeah, I think it also, for me, it also relates to what we were talking before about glitches and distortion and the noise, because there's also always this specter of noise and TV and what's lurking in betweens. And yeah, thank you so much. Bruce, I was wondering, because there's this aspect of sex in the film which is very, very present, and basically, as you say, the idea is that the visitor comes and fucks with the family, but they also fucks with their politics, and like kind of shakens up this notion of nuclear family on the one hand, this notion of bourgeoisie, of the certain way of living, of also representation of class, of whiteness a lot, because there is a lot of racial critique in there as well, and you do that with lines. But you also do that through sex. How did you come up with the concept? I mean, sure, always in reference to Panorama, but then creating this inner narrative where you quote certain political slogans, where you also put into scene different aspects of sexuality and also of kink and desire. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think The Visitor is a genre film as well. I mean, it's like a science fiction kind of film, you know, The Visitor to a Small Planet kind of science fiction genre, or the Alien Invader sort of. So I was riffing on that as a kind of new way to get into the politics of Tiarima, and so in a more modern context, it made more sense to have him be a black refugee, and you know, the extreme right in Britain now, as in Germany, is so xenophobic, and there's so much paranoia, and quite often it's projected onto them as a kind of sexual projection. So this idea of the invaders as sexual predators, or, you know, Trump famously calling Mexicans rapists, or, you know, or that they're coming for your daughters, you know, lock up your daughters. The refugees, the black man is coming, this sexually, you know, coded, potent man coming into, like, to challenge the white man and to pillage and, you know, take the women and everything. So I was playing with those ideas, and then also in porn, you know, those power dynamics are often sexualized in porn as fantasies. So it was a very potent mix of different genres, science fiction with the alien invader, and then agitprop, which is another genre that I quite often dip into, which is like making something very directly political. So I took a lot of slogans from the Labour Party that have to do with immigration, and corrupted them and changed them. So instead of the Labour Party slogan, open borders, I changed to open borders, open legs, and instead of for the many, not the few, I changed it to fuck for the many or not the few. So it's kind of a playful critique in a way of the left and their sloganeering politics and the ineffectualness of it, and kind of sexualizing it in a kind of satirical way. So yeah, it was a kind of I quite often in many of my films I play with, like, I reference 3 or 4 different genres, and it's a way of, it's also kind of a distancing thing. I use a lot of, in my work as a pornographer, I've always felt somewhat ambivalent about porn, and I'm never presented in a very straightforward way. So I always have techniques that make the audience really aware of their spectatorship and what they're watching and how they're watching and how they participate in the spectacle. And you know, that's one of the things I did with aesthetically in the movie. It's very highly aesthetic. There's kind of like all sorts of motifs, visual motifs, but also, I mean, to get even more meta, when we were shooting one night, I had at the gallery, we were shooting a sex scene, and we invited the public to come in and watch us shoot one of the scenes. So we were shooting this sex scene in the basement, basically, with the gallery, and I set up a wall with peepholes. The public could come and watch us shooting the sex scene through the holes, and we also had a live feed from the camera to monitors that were set up upstairs, and so it was really, really interesting for me because it made me and the performers really self-conscious of what we were doing, not only performatively, but just in terms of how that relates to the public and public morality and issues of if it's even illegal or not, and so that was my and it's interesting when you have an experience like that makes you self-conscious as a director, because when you're a director, you're a performer, right? You're performing on set. You have to kind of put on a kind of persona and be authoritative or whatever, So, all of those elements really tied in together.
It makes me think a lot about the intersection of like exposure and agency or self-exposure, if you say like spectatorship, because you were talking about the fetish and the voyeurism and also this ambivalence of on the one hand being super hostile and then having this weird desire towards the other. But if you're actively playing with it, what happens then? And it's also something that in a way you're doing, that you give a group the agency to present themselves, to perform in movements, in choreographies, through a space in the way they want to, having a lot of control about it, and suddenly there's different freedoms, and nonetheless there's more movement or other movements or even more bold movements than there could be maybe in a confined storyline. So that's what I really like. And I think it's wonderful how those three films work together, because the space and the space and the space is something that works the one way in your film and the very other way in your film. So there's also those moments of layering of realities that maybe, Jane, you want to go into a bit more. What is the show and the film? And how did you kind of hold this whole storyline together?
Yeah, it's a bit complicated. It's a film about these two queer kids, and they're in love with this TV show. I think quite literally they're in love with the TV show. And the TV show is about these two queer kids who fight monsters. And each of the characters in my film sort of have this parasocial relationship with one of the characters in the show that, as the movie goes on, becomes more and more sort of complicated. Even like I remember working with my composer, and we talked about how at the beginning of the movie you would have the movie score and then the TV show score, and they would be very easy to distinguish one from the other. And then by the sort of midpoint of the movie, these elements are all sort of swimming together. And I think it's sort of the same thing with reality in the film. There's this sort of ostensible reality that you're given at the beginning of the film as like the primary reality, and then there's this fictional show within the film. But even from the beginning, it's like I wanted the whole movie to feel, I would always say I wanted it to feel like watching those TV shows felt to me as a kid, which is very different than how they actually look. When I go back and watch them, they're like made for nothing. The monsters are not scary like I remember them. The acting is terrible, etc. But when I was a kid and watching them, it was like the entire world. It was like getting this glimpse into like a nether world that I never could have imagined. And I wanted the whole movie to sort of feel like this. But then I think I'm just fascinated by like layers of artifice, and because I think the film medium, right, it's like everything is artifice. And so as a filmmaker, all you can really choose is like how much you're trying to trick people with that artifice. And so the movie is very much in conversation with this, and every moment in the movie is like it's not linear. It's like everything is a different level of sort of like perhaps a good way to explain it is I had what I called my like monster scale, which is I was like, all right, there's a 1 and there's to 10, and a 10 is like the state of the art, like you're watching like the scary stories to tell in the dark Hollywood remake, and it's like CGI, and the monster is just like you're like, somebody spent $1 million on that monster. And then a 1 is like the bargain basement, like Goosebumps, early 90s, like somebody put on like a wolf mask kind of monster. And I gave every monster in my movie like a different number. The idea wasn't that they were all a 1 or all a 10. It's that things feel different from different angles and different parts of your life, and so the movie is sort of in conversation with that, but yeah, with just different levels of artifice.
Yeah, I love that, because it's also like there's not only the layers of reality and this whole idea of episodes and what TV does and how TV like translates into what TV might be now or not now. There's also this reflection of spectatorship, your own spectatorship, the character's spectatorship, and also the desire that you looked for there is maybe getting satisfied on a complete different level than rather rewatching the stuff that doesn't work for you anymore. So it's really this feeling, or maybe also the cause it serves to get into interaction with those monsters on the fringes of something that is very obvious, but we're maybe looking for the stuff behind that. Yeah.
I think I like have a complicated relationship with like entertainment and media and art, and which is like essentially the medium that I work in. I think growing up, like, these things meant so much to me because there wasn't much else for me to like hold on to, and so like in some very tangible ways, like it's dramatic to say that like Buffy the Vampire Slayer saved my life, but like like these shows meant a lot to me because of how little I was willing to invest in the quote unquote real world. And so I have this love for it, but I also like, there's something very sinister about that. It's like, it sounds sad to say, and it is kind of sad, right? And I'm a product of this, this like hyper postmodern American capitalist hell world, right? And like, that's the world that produced me, and that's the world that like showed me what love was through a TV screen, and that's the world that I want the films to sort of be complicated in the way that my relationship is complicated. I also like really don't want to hide the fact that like when I was watching those TV shows and they felt so personal to me and I loved them so much, I was watching like a corporate product that had been vetted by like all kinds of forces and written by some anonymous middle-aged man, and that kind of interaction is at the heart of my film, as well as is like the idea that kind of one-way mirror of a relationship, you see it, but it doesn't see you, is like inherently limited. And I hope that like, I'm kind of like both like have a lot of nostalgic tendencies, and I'm also like very, very suspicious of nostalgia as like a tool of capital.
Yeah, I really like a lot how you both now went into the ambivalences of your relationships towards the mediums that you work with, towards the form that you are kind of or that we are all related to, that there's a hate love, or there's a big suspicion also, and a big danger in inscribing oneself in those. In your case, it was the porn that you were referring to, needing a framework for you to work out differently, and in your case, it was referring to a reality or a realm of TV production and also knowledge production and meaning production that is kind of related to it. Because we were talking so much about translations, I would maybe like to go into your next step. You're taking your project further with the same group, but you're doing this translating work back into another form. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I am now like opening the film. The film opened yesterday, and I think I realized during the last months that I wanted to continue working with the group. Actually, they wanted to continue working together. While we were shooting, they were saying we have to do the second part. And at the beginning, it was just like a joke, like, yeah, let's do Reas 2. But at the end, it was like, no, we actually want to continue working together. And now I'm preparing a theater performance that I will start rehearsing in March. And it will be also a second part in terms that this film is about the experience of being in confinement. and it was shot inside of the prison, and with them reconstructing these stories. And the play will be about what happened after prison. So how do you go back home? What do you find? How do you feel after being abducted? Because there is something like about time that has been like taken away from them. And then you go back to life and you feel like you don't fit anymore. This is something that all of them were talking about, like you don't know anymore the codes, like how to move around. The things are changing so fast that they feel like somehow they can't go back. Not only because they have criminal records and they don't get jobs, not only because their families collapse during their time of confinement, but also because the reality is moving so fast that they actually don't know where they are anymore. So I think it's interesting to reflect on that, and to actually keep on working with them will be also a chance to give them also the experience of making shows and also traveling the world, because we are actually selling the piece to be shown in different parts of the world. So actually I love that the dream of Josely, who has this tattoo in the back saying that she wants to get to know Paris, but she never left the city of Buenos Aires, not even once, will come true, because we actually will go to perform in Paris, and somehow this dream of her will be happening. And I think this is also something that for me is important in my work, that because cinema is so much like taking so much from people, and it somehow stays fixed forever, and theater is much more about like being there and being together. So actually I feel that the second part will also give them the chance to get more from it. To get more from the audience, to get more from us, to actually share more the impact of what they did.
Yeah, and in a way, it also sounds like you would be collectively creating a kind of very specific practice that is very transformative, and that also entails different forms of performative and artistic expressions as a group, which is also quite amazing, because it's not only like movements within one space or within one work, but it's actual physical movements to places. I'm very curious to see it, and also to see what happens to it after. I'd like to take the moment. We do have an audience mic. I know the acoustics in this room are challenging to put it mildly. But if you want to ask a question or engage in the discussion, maybe just raise your hand and the microphone will be brought to you. Second row.
I have a question for Jane. Your movies are exploring this dynamic of fictional entities giving real-life consequences, both good and bad, and which is a dynamic you explored even before your first feature film, World's Fair, in the essay film, A Self-Induced Hallucination, using the Slenderman stabbing. And while you're talking a lot about World's Fair and I saw the TV Glow, I would be interested to hear what you see as the role of a self-induced hallucination for your further filmography and the exploration of that area.
This is a reference to an archival documentary that I made that sort of started actually as like a mood reel of sorts for my first feature film. But do people know who the Slender Man is? This is like an internet boogeyman, sort of like the most famous export of an internet genre called creepypasta, which is derived from copy-paste, creepypasta, the internet. My first narrative film, We're All Going to the World's Fair, is sort of set in this world of like kids who play like online role-playing games and try to scare each other by creating these like monsters and scary stories that they then pretend are real. And I was really fascinated by this when I made that film, because there was so much longing in it. There was so much longing for like reality to be different. And even though I was like a little too old to have participated in that on the internet myself as a kid, it just felt so tied with my emotional space online, which was a space of like writing fan fiction and wanting to sort of exist outside the body and exist outside of like a reality that felt constraining and like, you know, as I was coming out of childhood into a body that felt wrong, like just not not as exciting as I was told life was going to be. The film, that film is called A Self-Induced Hallucination, which is somebody in one of these videos that I use. The entire film is made out of YouTube archive and sort of like is questioning this sort of like internet's relationship to truth and fiction. And a self-induced hallucination is the definition of a word that the internet really likes, which is the tulpa, which is in the film it's like Slender Man is a tulpa, which is this idea of like a thought form, a thing that's only real if everyone agrees that it's real, and it thus takes on its power. At the time I was not out when I made this film, but I was like definitely looking for my transness, you know. As I said, I think the film was I think it started as a cry for help, and then it became something emancipating. But I think in this idea of like a self-induced hallucination, and in the film eventually you hear somebody make the point that like kind of everything's a self-induced hallucination. There are just some that we agree as a society are, worth investing in, and some that we say are crazy. So while I don't think that like literally we can like make a monster on the internet real by all agreeing it's real, I think that like this relationship between truth and fiction and like the emancipation of realizing that like reality is something that we do have the power to construct in a certain sense was something that really did help me on my coming out journey.
Yeah, thank you so much also for bringing in this aspect of longing and desire to alter or negotiate or even create or construct realities. And then always, I still hear the suspicion a lot of what is not. Is there another question, comment, something you feel like sharing? Maybe up there.
Hi, I haven't seen your films yet. I'm excited to. I am coming from like a queer kink world and also have a long background loving film, but listening to you all speak, I'm just thinking a lot about how in queer spaces and time, there's just so much more safety and creativity and by contrast, beautiful films in the straight normie world, but just such a low bar for safety and creativity. So this is actually a boring practical question, but I'm wondering if anyone has distribution for more people to be able to watch your work. It's too far. Did you hear me?
I heard everything, but the very last part, it's a very practical question, and you were wondering if anyone has?
Distribution. Not a very interesting question, but no. Yeah.
But important one, maybe you feel like going into the strategies of distribution, if you do work with sales. I was wondering before when you were talking about the theater project, is there any plans of distributing the two works together, for example? Are you pursuing a classical release? How about you with also pornography and explicit works? It's not so easy to get the classical releases. Maybe tell us a little bit about that. Thank you for the question. Do you want to start?
We are thinking about releasing the film together with the play when we are showing it in theater festivals. I actually like to bring films into theater festivals and plays into film festivals. To kind of navigate in between the different fields, because I feel like that there is a lot of my work that is like not feeling comfortable in any I'm a theater maker, but in a way I do a theater that is not exactly like fiction, so I always have the problem of what kind of thing you do. You work with non-professional actors, and it's always like, is it documentary, but you're like writing fiction, so you never fit. Also in the cinema I feel like an outsider, so in a way I like to think that like the art I do can move between like spaces and also between the art world, also exhibitions. So I don't think it so much as, you know, like distributing in these channels that are so, in a way, profit oriented, and thinking about like how much you are going to sell to whom, who has the rights to distribute. I think it more as in a different way somehow.
My film was financed and will be released by A24, like a distribution company, and will, I think, have like a fairly traditional release. Which like I guess like it's something that I'm both very proud of and also like I have some ambivalence about, which is that like I think I am enough of a realist to understand like the space that I'm working in as like a commercial space just by proxy of like other people spending a decent amount of money on my film, and very aware of my role as like a trans girl within that, and an artist within that, and someone who considers himself an anti-capitalist within that, and and also like that is there are limiting factors there, and like I knew that I couldn't make a film filled with like fucking like Bruce's wonderful film, and it, so it almost becomes this like strange form of censorship or a creative challenge, in the same way that like the lack of money on my first film was a creative challenge. The fact that I know that this is something that will be like a commercial product in a sense becomes like something to play within the confines of, and and to do so with the language barrier that exists between like my lived experience as like a trans artist and like a capitalist for-profit space that feels very defiantly not trans, and that in most cases do not share my gaze or values, becomes like a political minefield, and very interesting. And I had fun. I got traumatized. I did it all. It was all that. But the film, I'm very proud of the fact that I made something that feels honest to me, and that will have like a larger, will be seen in sort of like a pop cultural sphere, at least in America.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Bruce, how about you?
Yeah. The Visitor started out more as an art project. So, as I said, at this art gallery, I didn't really have any expectations for it to be sold commercially or as a kind of theatrical film. I kind of go back and forth in my work between making bigger budgeted films that are done in a more industry model with like a union crew, and and they're distributed in more conventional streams, in a more conventional structure. And then I make these kind of guerrilla films that are very super sexually explicit, and they're lower budget, so they have less commercial potential. And then I make full-on porn, which is the other industry besides Hollywood, the bigger, probably bigger industry, which is like, professional porn, which has its own companies, its own distribution networks built into them. So that's a whole different experience as well. And it can be just as kind of, just as bureaucratic, just as kind of like, this idea of like a capitalist product that has to be, promoted, and the kind of contracts you have to sign with a porn company, or in terms of what you're expected to do to promote it, is very onerous. I mean, it's very demanding. And so for The Visitor, it turned out to be a more ambitious project than I expected. And my world sales agent for my previous film, which is a bigger film, Saint Narcisse, have picked up The Visitor, and they're taking it on, which is really cool to me, because it is going to be quite a difficult film for them to sell in a more conventional streams and whatnot. But what I like about that is it's good if you can find a sales agent that are more interested in you as an artist or a production entity. I'm sure you had the same with A24. It's like if they trust you as an artist and they support you, then even if you make a difficult film that they think is less commercial, then they're going to still help you try to sell it. So that's actually a heartening thing if you can find that in the business.
Yeah, I want to say one thing about what you say, that I think it's really important what you actually said, because I said this about like distribution, strange ways of distributing, but I also have a sales agent here, like a distribution company called Luxbox, and I feel like they are exactly like this. They're having this problem of like, they don't know how to sell this film, but they are committed to the work, I do, and the work of certain artists. And I think that's like the best way, to work with someone who actually embrace your work as an artist, and not think about like this, how I'm going to sell this, but more like, how can I support this artist?
Yeah, it's kind of rare, but you can find it. My sales agent is called BFF, by the way. I didn't mention it. Best friend forever.
Yeah, but I think it's super important also how you describe how it's possible to inhabit all those different spaces of distribution, and also transgress not only the genres and within the work, but also moving between a theater festival and a cinema festival and a theatric release, and maybe a performance that has already part of the production process. So there is, in a way, it's also queering the networks or the strategies of distribution and working with sales. Having this classic theatric release, yes, it is inhabiting capitalist commercial spaces, but nonetheless it also forces them to change their tactics, which is also very beautiful. So there's also an altering of agency that is happening there that I find very heartening, also from a programming perspective, because it pushes us to create different spaces and to reach out maybe to other audiences and bring stuff that has always been there together. And that's what I'm super grateful about when it comes to your practice and also your dedication. So thank you for that. Yeah. We have time for one very last question, if there is one. Yes, please, here on the lower left.
Hi, thank you. This has been super informative and interesting.
Just a bit closer.
Louder.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, the acoustics are terrible.
Famously quiet voice. I loved hearing about how important as a composer, I'm a composer, how important the music was in both your films, and from the beginning of the films, and how it affected the whole tone. And I would love to hear more about that, but also from Bruce a little bit about how you work with composers or sync in your films.
Anyone wants to start?
My last couple of films I've worked with composers, and for The Visitor I wanted to again make a more contemporary version of Tirima, which is set in the late 60s, but I wanted it to be thoroughly contemporary, so I got a techno DJ who's also a composer, who's based in London, Hannah Holland, did a techno track for the entire movie, and it's amazing, and it's really, it's kind of almost wall-to-wall sound music through the whole movie, and it really kind of, it plays into the porn angle, which, you usually have that kind of music playing in porn, but it kind of drives, because there's very little dialogue in the film, at least the first 3/4 of it, it really drives the movie forward. It really, and it makes a difficult film kind of more palatable in a way. It's like watching a continuous music video or something. So it kind of plays into a pop cultural, the way that music videos are consumed. It kind of plays into the same thing. But yeah, it's always, for me, music is always incredibly important. I've made other movies where I, buy the rights to pop songs, and I use them as kind of almost as you would use a score to kind of like underscore the performances and the narrative.
Yeah, I would go back to something we were talking about at the very beginning, which was for me making this movie, like it was written during quite like a dark period of very early transition, but by the time I actually made the movie, I was sort of like in a very different headspace. I was like, oh wait, like not being a boy is awesome. My life is getting good. And I thought a lot about it, like, how do I make a movie that, like, even though what is on the screen and what it's talking about is sort of very dark, like a movie that is also filled with queer joy and also, like, just having a budget for the first time. I felt a little bit like a kid in a candy shop in terms of, like, I want to just fill this with beautiful things. And yeah, the movie is also filled with music. I made an original soundtrack of 17 original songs that were written for the film with different queer artists who I love, and was really just like a fan and really wanted to make something that could sort of be like, like the soundtracks of my youth, which is a very like 90s thing, I think. And then in addition to that original soundtrack, my composer for my first film, who's an artist named Alex G, did the score for this new one as well, and did like it's a very dense and strange score with a lot of different sounds in there. And yeah, I do just work from a musical place. I think that I'm supposed to be a musician, but I don't have talent in that space. So I make movies that I try to make feel like music.
Are you releasing the original soundtrack?
Yes.
Yay.
We're also releasing the Visitor soundtrack too, on vinyl.
Yay. So we will party with your music.
Well, I work together for the film with the two composers and singers. One is Ulises Conti and the other one is Marlene Panconin. And we worked on the music, composing the music together also with the performers. So it was a very collaborative process, like between them, us, as artists, and like a kind of continuous workshop on how to write the songs and how to play them, because I also play the songs live in the film. I think it was a lot of fun to discover also how to adapt these different genres, these cumbias or these rock songs. To have like the freedom to work with different genres was a lot of fun also. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think we have to come to an end. Thank you so much for taking the time for this conversation, despite the difficult acoustics and environment. We already said it was also a little fun to be in the food court. It relates to those quotes of popular culture and cinemas. And thank you for being boundary pushing and doing what you do. We're keen to see and to hear more. All the films are playing again within the next days. There is Jane's premiere tomorrow, so go check the films out and have a beautiful festival. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.